Resident Evil 9 is on the radar for many RE fans at the moment, and it could even be the next game in Capcom's pipeline, or maybe the second, but regardless, we know it's well underway with its development. As with most AAA games, leaks do begin to surface during its development, and one of the leaks that piqued my interest not too long ago was from an apparent playtester. And of course, as with most leaks, do take this with a grain of salt, but it's always fun to get the discussion rolling as to what we could expect to see in RE9, but once again, take it with a grain of salt so you're not hyping up your expectations to a monumental degree and then being extremely disappointed with where the game actually ends up. But with that said, guys, let's jump straight into what this leak had to say. So the leaker begins the post by saying how they don't expect anyone to believe them and couldn't contain the excitement, and thinks that Reddit is the best anonymous place for it to be told. The leaker does go on to say that they playtested RE9, and it's not the first time that they've pushed out a few leaks, and apparently they did it with a few RE8 builds prior to that game's release, and feels like leaking is normal in this industry, and that's kind of their justification as to why they're telling all of us this. So they say that they playtested this RE9 demo with 7 other people, and apparently it happened in Japan before this person managed to test it. Not too much to work with there. That seems like a reasonable piece of information, as Japan is pretty big on Resident Evil, so that's not too surprising. And as for the build itself, so they say that they played as Jill Valentine as the primary protagonist, and it lasted for 2 hours, and after that 2 hours they had to leave the controller at the table. So this is pretty interesting, as we did have quite a few leaks saying that Jill Valentine's not in the game, some saying she is, some saying that she's a side character that's not playable. There's a lot going back and forth, as you'd expect with leaks before a game's official reveal or even release, if that. But it is pretty interesting. I'm not surprised if they do bring Jill back, as they did bring her back in Death Island, and she was a character that was so not present in the franchise for a while that they could have just left her out and just kept this trilogy going without her. But it seems apparently that they're bringing her back, which I'm all for. The build started off with an RE9 Apocalypse title screen, which also feeds into those other rumours of it being called RE9 Apocalypse, and it's Jill's first solo mission after her return to the BSAA. And the story behind it is that Chris put her on a support team following the Death Island events, which is why she wasn't in RE7 and 8. I suppose this would make sense given all the stuff that Jill has gone through, and Chris is very caring for her, so he would likely put her on the sidelines to deal with the more basic or lower tier threats, while he goes on to the missions that are actually dealing with the world ending threats, just so she doesn't have any kind of breakdown or any of her traumas come back during those more dangerous missions. And this was all that the person was able to read during the demo, as the loading was fast, is what they've claimed. As for the setting of this demo, it's in an abandoned hospital, and based on the writing on the wall, the person thinks it was in Russia. Not too great on my Russian spellings or alphabet, so of course, that's just what they're saying, we'll just take it for what it is. And the context behind the mission is that Jill has gone to investigate a secret BSAA facility, which I suppose is in Russia, and Chris does communicate with Jill throughout the mission in a Hunnigan RE4 style communication platform, where he'll call her and there'll be dialogue back and forth, and then Jill continues with the mission. The leaker goes on to describe the enemy types that he came across, or they came across, as I suppose we don't know the gender of the leaker, and they say that they came across the regular zombie enemies, a bipedal creature with teeth on its belly that makes a sound that stuns the player, and a new form of hunter. I guess this is a pretty given standard for Resident Evil games, nothing too surprising there. We have our generic zombie enemies, a new type of hunter, which is always nice to see, and then a more weird, unique monster to this specific Resident Evil game, which is apparently a monster with teeth on its belly that can stun you. Nothing too crazy there, I think that's kind of a given for a Resident Evil game. And then moving back on to Jill herself, she apparently wears a uniform like in Revelation 1's flashback sequence, but this time with black short hair, and her face is based on the Resident Evil 3 Jill Valentine. To be honest, I'm not too surprised by this, as they did use the Resident Evil 3 remake design for Jill in the Death Island movie, so I suppose Capcom is just trying to make that the norm for how Jill looks, at least in the current timeline. And yeah, that's all we really got on how Jill looks. And then as for the weapons she was using, she had access to a pistol, a shotgun, and a knife, and the knife was more of a defensive weapon, similar to how it's used in RE2, and the leaker describes the shotgun as being very brutal and perfected compared to the Resident Evil 4 Remake one. As for the pistol, nothing was mentioned by the leaker, but I think it's a given for a Resident Evil game to have a pistol, shotgun, some form of automatic rifle, and a knife within it, so there's not too much to talk about for this specific part of the leak. As for the atmosphere, they describe it in the post as having an RE2 remake style atmosphere, which is always great to see for a Resident Evil game. It is survival horror, so I do love to see a more closed environment and locked doors, long corridors, which is also stuff that he has mentioned, or they have mentioned within this post. And they do say that the gore is a lot heavier, especially when shooting a zombie. They don't describe it too much, but I suppose it could indicate that we, according to the leak at least, we could have ligaments flying around when you shoot a zombie with a shotgun, for example. As for a bit more of the description on the environment and the atmosphere, for the context of it, apparently in the demo you're given a card to the west wing of the hospital, which is the play area for this build, and I would assume in the main game you would have access to the entire hospital and work your way through it, gaining cards and access to various areas of this location. So the next bit is a pretty interesting one, and it's that Jill has a Stalker type enemy in this build. As for whether or not it's a full game Stalker, or if it's Jill's specific Stalker, or if it's just a Stalker in the location, it's a mutation of the Goatman enemy, and the leaker says that you can hear the sounds of the hooves and animalistic groans that could be heard throughout the hospital location as you traversed it, which sounds pretty scary. And they describe the Goatman as having a bipedal humanoid type figure, completely dissolved in his own skin, or its own skin, drooling a black substance and having glowing yellow eyes, which sounds pretty cool. Of course, you'll definitely have to see this enemy for ourselves, at least for myself, to actually see how terrifying it is, as it does seem slightly out of place, but given with what RE8 was able to do with the werewolf type enemies. But if this is true, I'm sure Capcom has pulled this off in a fantastic way, and I look forward to seeing what they have to show us with their official reveal and marketing for this Resident Evil entry. And that pretty much sums it up for all the stuff that this leaker was able to tell us, for what they apparently were able to say in this mysterious demo build that they are showing a few playtesters. They do end the post with saying that they don't expect anyone to believe it, and that they hope an announcement comes soon and doesn't take too long for Capcom to push out. But that's pretty much all they were able to tell us, guys. Of course, feel free to drop all your thoughts down below as to what you thought of this leak. And if you are able to find it, feel free, can't even speak anymore, feel free to drop that in the comment section so everyone else can see it. Once again, do take this with a grain of salt, as it could all just be a lie. A decent chunk of this is fairly obvious for a Resident Evil game to have. So I'm sure anyone could easily just type this up, but there are a few little details here and there that do have a bit more of a sturdiness to their context. But regardless, time will tell as to whether or not this is true. So as I said, guys, feel free to drop all your thoughts down below, and I look forward to reading how the discussion continues. I know this is only the second video on this channel, guys, but I hope you did enjoy the video, and feel free to leave your feedback down below, and if you did enjoy, a like would be extremely appreciated, and subscribe for a lot more Resident Evil videos from the Umbrella Archives. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.